Hello, I'm Tom Hagedorn, and I just recently released my first book. It's entitled Founding Zealots, How Evangelicals Created America's First Public Schools, 1783 to 1865. And it was kind of an interesting journey. I actually started writing the book about 20 years ago, and it essentially tells the story of how the first public schools got started. And what I found was a pretty surprising result, and that was that I found that evangelical ministers were primarily responsible for starting our first public schools. And as you might expect, since they were ministers, their primary purpose for the schools was evangelization and discipleship. Those of you that have heard of or seen the McGuffey's Readers, this might make some sense to you because there's a lot of Christian content and Christian messages in the McGuffey's Readers, and those were used very extensively back in the 19th century in the first schools. So I found this information very early on, but then I started going to current textbooks and histories, and I found a very different story. I found that modern historians had basically written the ministers out of our history. In some cases they had their names, but they never referred to them as ministers, and they rarely talked about the Christian intent that they had for the first schools. So that's what kept me going. I kept going back and forth. I read literally hundreds of journals and books and old manuscripts and laws from back in the 1820s and 30s and 40s. And I would read this documentation, see that the public schools had a very Christian content. And then I would loop back to the current history books and find hardly any of this. So that made me curious as I was researching and writing the book. I tried to understand, or at least figure out, why did the historians come up with such a different take on this than I did. And what I found was pretty shocking and a little bit frightening might be too strong of a word, but what I found was that a lot of modern historians have a very strong bias against evangelical Christians. In fact, there have even been sociological studies that talk about this. They've actually studied it and found that if you're an evangelical, you have a more difficult time getting employed, in a college faculty, or also moving up the food chain, so to speak, in terms of getting promotions. They've actually done research that doesn't exactly prove it, but strongly indicates that that is probably what's happening. So I talk about all that in the epilogue, modern day higher education and some of the problems that are there, some of the challenges that are there for evangelicals. So anyway, that's what the book is about, Founding Zealots, How Evangelicals Created America's First Public Schools, and you can learn more about it at the website, which is www.foundingzealots.com, and that's plural for zealots. So thank you very much.